Canada's fighter jet procurement, one of the most complex, most expensive, and most consequential defense acquisition decisions in this country's modern history, has entered a new phase that nobody predicted when the F-35 was selected as Canada's preferred platform. That new phase has a name that sounds technical but carries enormous strategic weight: dual fleet. The idea that Canada might operate not one but two different fighter aircraft types simultaneously, combining the F-35's advanced stealth and fifth-generation capability with the Gripen's lower operating cost, greater flexibility, and non-American supply chain characteristics. Yun poses moset bandin, bosam moved from the margins of defense policy discussion into the mainstream of Canada's fighter procurement conversation. And the fact that Saab, the Swedish manufacturer of the Gripen, has publicly engaged with Canada's ongoing F-35 review and made a renewed case for its platform's relevance in Canada's defense posture tells us something important about where this procurement story stands and where it may be heading. But here is what this story is really about. Beyond the aircraft types, beyond the technical specifications, beyond the manufacturer competition, it is about Canada's sovereign right to make its own defense procurement decisions based on Canadian strategic requirements, Canadian fiscal realities, and Canadian sovereignty considerations, rather than on the assumption that alliance relationships define Canada's equipment choices for it. And it is about the economic consequences. It gets the jobs, the industrial benefits, the taxpayer dollars, the community impacts that flow from procurement decisions of this scale. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the dual fleet concept involves, what Saab's public engagement with Canada's review signals, what the federal government's actual procurement posture is, what the fiscal and economic stakes look like for Canadian taxpayers and workers, and what Canadians need to know about one of the largest and most strategically significant spending decisions their government will make in this decade. Welcome to Maple Wire. Glad you are here. Today we are breaking down Canada's fighter procurement review and the dual fleet conversation it has generated, the F-35 contract that was announced, the strategic questions that have been raised about it in the current geopolitical environment, Saab's public engagement with Canada's review, what a dual fleet arrangement would actually involve operationally and fiscally, and what the economic and community consequences of whatever decision Canada makes will be. We will cover who is affected, what the accountability questions are, what mistakes Canadians make when interpreting defense procurement headlines, and exactly where to find verified official information. This video is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or policy advice. Always verify directly with official Canadian government sources. All links are in the description below. Subscribe to Maple Wire if you are not already. Defense procurement decisions of this scale shape Canadian military capability, Canadian industrial employment, and Canadian taxpayer obligations for decades. We track them so you have the context you need. To understand why the dual fleet concept has entered Canada's fighter procurement conversation and why it represents something more significant than a simple technical debate about aircraft types, you need to understand the history of Canada's fighter replacement process and the strategic environment in which the current review is taking place. Canada has been attempting to replace its aging CF-18 Hornet fleet for well over a decade. The CF-18, which entered the Canadian service in the 1980s, has been life extended repeatedly as the procurement process to replace it has navigated political changes, procedural controversies, legal challenges, and shifting strategic requirements. The process has been among the most prolonged and complicated defense procurement exercises in Canadian history. According to Public Services and Procurement Canada and the Department of National Defense's publicly available communications, Canada ultimately selected the F-35, manufactured by Lockheed Martin of the United States, as its preferred fighter platform following a competitive evaluation process. A contract for F-35 aircraft was announced, with associated industrial and technological benefit commitments from Lockheed Martin that are supposed to generate Canadian economic activity equivalent to the contract value. That announcement in normal procurement circumstances would represent the end of the platform selection conversation. The selected platform would proceed through contract negotiation, industrial benefit agreement finalization, and eventually production and delivery. But the current geopolitical environment is not normal procurement circumstances. The Canada-U.S. trade conflict, which has produced tariffs on Canadian goods, political rhetoric about Canadian economic dependence, and a deterioration of bilateral trust that has been publicly acknowledged by the Canadian federal government, has introduced the dimension into the 35 procurement that was not present when the competitive evaluation was conducted. The F-35 is an American aircraft manufactured by an American company dependent on American supply chains, American export control authorizations, and American government decisions about technology access and upgrades. In an environment where the reliability of the Canada-U.S. relationship is being actively questioned at the highest levels of the Canadian federal government, the question of whether Canada should be acquiring a platform whose ongoing operability depends entirely on American goodwill is a legitimate strategic question, so not a fringe concern. According to publicly available statements from senior Canadian officials and defense policy commentary referenced in federal government communications, this supply chain and technology dependence dimension of the F-35 has been acknowledged as a factor in Canada's ongoing review of its fighter procurement posture. The review is not a cancellation of the F-35 contract. It is an assessment of whether the original procurement decision remains optimal in a changed strategic environment and whether the addition of a second platform with different supply chain characteristics could address the sovereignty and operational resilience concerns that the changed environment has made salient. This is where Saab's engagement with Canada's review becomes strategically significant. Saab's Gripen, a highly capable, operationally proven fighter aircraft that is manufactured in Sweden, maintained with non-American supply chains, and operated successfully by a number of allied air forces, offers Canada something the F-35 cannot: operational independence from American government decisions about technology access, upgrade authorization, and supply chain availability. According to Saab's publicly available statements and the company's engagement with Canada's Defense Procurement Review, Saab has made the case that the Gripen could serve as a complement to F-35 acquisition, not a replacement, but a second platform that provides Canada with a sovereign operational capability that does not depend on American approval or American supply chain reliability. A dual fleet arrangement would give Canada the fifth-generation stealth capability of the F-35 for high-end threat environments while maintaining a robust, independently sustainable operational force in the Gripen that can function regardless of the state of any bilateral relationship with Washington. According to the Department of National Defense's publicly available defense policy framework and the federal government's broader sovereign defense capability commitments, the concept of reducing Canadian military dependence on any single foreign power's equipment and supply chains is consistent with the overall direction of Canadian defense policy in the current strategic environment. The dual fleet concept is not a departure from Canadian defense policy. It is an expression of it. Now, let us talk about what the dual fleet possibility means in practical and economic terms for different groups of Canadians. For Canadian taxpayers, a dual fleet arrangement raises immediate and important fiscal questions. Operating two different fighter aircraft types simultaneously increases training costs, maintenance complexity, spare parts inventory requirements, and the overall per unit operational cost of the fighter force. A single platform fleet is operationally more efficient and less expensive to sustain than a dual platform fleet. The fiscal case for a dual fleet must therefore be made on strategic grounds that the sovereignty, operational resilience, and supply chain independence benefits of the Gripen's addition to the F-35 force justify the additional costs. According to the Department of Finance Canada's budget frameworks, major defense procurement decisions are assessed within the federal fiscal plan, and their cost implications are subject to parliamentary accountability. For Canada's aerospace sector, particularly in Quebec and Ontario, the dual fleet question is an industrial opportunity question as much as a strategic one. Both F-35 and Gripen procurement involve industrial and technological benefits commitments, contractual obligations for manufacturers to generate Canadian industrial activity equivalent to contract value. Dual procurement would generate ITB commitments from two manufacturers rather than one, potentially creating more Canadian aerospace employment, more Canadian supply chain activity, and more industrial benefit than a single platform acquisition at the same total value. According to the Industrial and Technological Benefits Policy administered by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, these commitments are supposed to translate into real Canadian jobs and manufacturing programs. For Canadian Forces personnel, the pilots, maintenance technicians, logistics specialists, and support staff who would operate and sustain whatever platform Canada selects, a dual fleet arrangement creates real operational and career implications. Training on two different aircraft types, maintaining proficiency across two different systems, and sustaining two different maintenance pipelines are significant operational burdens that the Royal Canadian Air Force would need to manage. The operational assessment of dual fleet viability is a matter of professional military judgment that belongs to the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces, not to procurement officials or political decision makers. For communities hosting Canadian Forces air bases, Cold Lake in Alberta, Bagotville in Quebec, and other installations connected to Canada's fighter operations, procurement decisions determine what platforms are flown, what maintenance requirements generate local employment, and what operational activity sustains the community economic foundation that base operations provide. Different platform choices generate different employment profiles and different local economic effects. For students and young Canadians considering careers in the Canadian Armed Forces, particularly those interested in aviation, aerospace maintenance, or defense technology, the platform decisions made in this procurement will shape the career opportunities available in the Royal Canadian Air Forces the next 30 years. The skills required to maintain and operate F-35s are different from those required for Gripens. Career planning in the defense sector is informed by understanding what platforms the Canadian Forces will actually operate. Now let us address the mistakes Canadians are making when they process headlines about the F-35 review and the dual fleet conversation. The first and most important mistake is treating public discussion of the dual fleet concept as equivalent to a government decision to pursue it. The federal government has not announced a dual fleet procurement decision. Yet what has happened is that the procurement review, triggered by the changed strategic environment, has generated public discussion of options, including the dual fleet possibility. Discussion of an option is not a decision about that option. Canadians should track official government announcements through Public Services and Procurement Canada and the Department of National Defense rather than treating media and manufacturer commentary as equivalent to government policy. The second mistake is underestimating the complexity and cost of a dual fleet arrangement. Two aircraft types means two training pipelines, two maintenance supply chains, two sets of simulator requirements, two pilot type ratings, and significantly higher total life cycle costs than a single platform force. The operational efficiency cost of a dual fleet is real and significant. Any government consideration of this option must account for these costs honestly, and Canadians should demand that the public discussion of dual fleet options include honest fiscal analysis. The third mistake is ignoring the industrial and technological benefits dimension of the procurement decision. Whatever platform or platforms Canada selects, the ITB commitments attached to the procurement contract are the mechanism through which Canadian taxpayers recover economic value from defense spending. The quality, enforceability, and actual delivery of those commitments, they're tracked by Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada and subject to Auditor General oversight, matter more for Canadian economic outcomes than the platform selection itself. The fourth mistake is treating the F-35 contract as either final and irreversible or as easily canceled without consequence. Major defense procurement contracts involve complex legal, financial, and relationship obligations. The F-35 contract involves commitments to Lockheed Martin, to the F-35 Joint Program Office, and to Canada's F-35 partner nation relationships that carry real exit costs and diplomatic implications. Canadians should understand that the procurement review is operating within a context of existing contractual and relationship obligation, not as a blank slate platform choice. Here is your verified action checklist for staying accurately informed on this story as it develops. Visit the Department of National Defence through Canada.ca for official information on Canada's fighter capability requirements, the F-35 procurement status, and any formal announcements about the procurement review. Check Public Services and Procurement Canada through Canada.ca for official procurement process information, contract status updates, and industrial and technological benefits framework details relevant to the fighter acquisition. Access the Auditor General of Canada at oagbvg.gc.ca for any audit reports addressing Canada's fighter procurement process, ITB compliance, and the federal government's management of major defense acquisitions. Visit Parliament of Canada at parl.ca for Standing Committee on National Defense reports and testimony that provide independent parliamentary assessment of Canada's fighter procurement decisions and the strategic context in which they are being made. Monitor the Department of Finance Canada at canada.ca and Department Finance for federal budget documents that disclose how major defense procurement commitments are financed and what fiscal implications they carry for the overall federal budget. If you're a business in the aerospace supply chain seeking to understand how fighter procurement ITB obligations create industrial opportunity, contact Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada and the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada for sector-specific guidance. Drop a comment below with your province. If you work in Canada's aerospace sector, live near a Canadian Forces Air Base, are a current or former Canadian Forces member, or are a taxpayer with a perspective on how Canada's fighter procurement should balance strategic sovereignty with fiscal responsibility, tell us your view. Do you think a dual fleet arrangement makes strategic sense for Canada? Do you think the fiscal cost is justified? We read every comment and your perspective matters. Here is your rapid recap. Canada's F-35 fighter procurement, selected following a competitive evaluation process, is under strategic review in a changed geopolitical environment where the Canada-U.S. relationship has deteriorated and the question of Canadian military dependence on American supply chains has become a legitimate sovereign defense concern. Saab has publicly engaged with Canada's review and made the case for the Gripen as a complement to F-35 acquisition in a dual fleet arrangement, providing Canada with operational independence that a solely F-35 force cannot offer. The dual fleet concept carries real operational efficiency costs and fiscal implications that must be honestly assessed. The industrial and technological benefits obligations attached to whatever procurement Canada ultimately selects are the mechanism through which Canadian taxpayers recover economic value from defense spending, and the accountability mechanisms, Public Services and Procurement Canada, the Auditor General, and parliamentary oversight are available to Canadians who want to track whether procurement decisions deliver on their promises. The open question this story leaves is whether Canada's strategic review of its fighter procurement will produce a modified acquisition strategy, including some form of dual fleet arrangement, or whether the F-35 contract proceeds on its original terms with the strategic sovereignty concerns addressed through other means. That answer will emerge from formal government announcements that Maple Wire will track as they develop. Subscribe so you get the update when it matters. Like this video, if it gave you a complete and strategically grounded picture of what Canada's fighter procurement review and the dual fleet conversation actually mean, share it with family and friends, particularly anyone in Quebec's aerospace sector, near a Canadian Forces Air Base, or asking what Canada's defense procurement decisions mean for strategic sovereignty, taxpayer value, and industrial employment. Send it on WhatsApp to anyone following Canada's Defense File who deserves an accurate sourced breakdown of where this story actually stands. All official source links are in the description below. Stay informed, verify everything, and we will see you in the next update.